The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and intent. But what happens when something arrives that exists outside that web entirely? A hunger so vast and alien that the Force itself recoils from its presence. The galaxy far, far away was about to discover that among the endless void between stars, there are things older and hungrier than even the Sith could imagine. Imperial Scout Captain Jivan Moore had served the Empire for 12 years, mapping hyperspace routes through the unknown regions. His ship, the Vindictive Eye, was one of 6 vessels tasked with charting navigable paths beyond the Outer Rim's edge. It was tedious work, scanning dead systems and cataloging spatial anomalies, but Moore took pride in expanding Imperial territory where the Republic had feared to venture that. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks into their mission. The Relentless Dawn, captained by his Academy rival, Senth Kavur, stopped responding to communications. Standard protocol suggested equipment failure. The unknown regions were notorious for sensor ghosts and communication dead zones. Moore logged the incident and continued his sweep. 2 days later, his comm officer picked up a fragmented transmission. Not from the Relentless Dawn, but from a frequency that shouldn't exist, organic somehow, pulsing with a rhythm that made the crew's teeth ache. The translation algorithms struggled before producing a partial decode, not words but intent. Hunger, need, consumption. Captain, we're detecting multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace, his tactical officer reported, voice tight with confusion. They're not on any Imperial registry. They're not on any registry. The viewport filled with nightmares. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. Massive organisms the size of star destroyers. Their carapaces ridged with chitin that gleamed purple and black in the distant starlight. Bioplasma flickered along protrusions that might have been weapons or sensory organs. Smaller creatures swarmed around them like parasites, each one easily the size of a starfighter. They moved with purpose, with coordination that spoke of a single directing intelligence. Biological readings are off the scale, the science officer stammered. Captain, these things are alive, all of them. The large ones, the small ones. They're reading as a single interconnected organism. Moore's hand hovered over the evacuation alarm. 12 years of service. And nothing in Imperial tactical doctrine had prepared him for this. Weapons status? Turbo lasers charged and ready, sir, but I don't think. The creatures moved. Not toward the Vindictive Eye, but past it, toward the only planet in the system. A lifeless rock that Imperial surveys had dismissed as strategically worthless. Moore watched in growing horror as the massive bioships released thousands upon thousands of smaller organisms. Spores, perhaps, or seeds. They fell toward the planet's surface like rain. Within hours, the planet's barren surface began to change. Organic structures erupted from the ground, twisted spires of flesh and chitin that pulsed with bioluminescent light. The atmosphere itself shifted, becoming thick with spores that registered on sensors as both living tissue and aggressive terraforming agent. Captain, the smaller organisms, they're breaking apart the planetary crust. They're eating it, converting mineral deposits into more of themselves. Moore activated the long-range transmitter, knowing it would take weeks for his message to reach Imperial space. This is Scout Captain Jevon Moore of the Vindictive Eye, broadcasting on all Imperial frequencies. We have encountered an unknown Xenos threat in the unknown regions, coordinates attached. They are biological in nature, highly organized, and capable of planetary-scale consumption. This is not a drill. I repeat. The comm officer screamed. Every screen in the ship went white with interference, then filled with images that shouldn't exist. Alien synapses firing across light years, a vast and terrible consciousness that noticed them the way a human might notice an insect. The psychic pressure was overwhelming, pressing against minds that had never been trained to resist such intrusion. Moore felt his thoughts beginning to fray at the edges. Through the viewport, he saw the creatures turning their attention toward his ship. Not with malice or anger, but with the simple recognition that his crew represented biomass, fuel, material to be broken down and repurposed. His final transmission was barely coherent. They're everywhere, in our heads, in the Force itself. There's a shadow. They're coming. Tell the Emperor. Tell him nothing can stop. The vindictive eye went silent. In the weeks that followed, 5 more Imperial scout ships would vanish in the unknown regions. And the creatures, these Tyranids as ancient archives would later name them, began their inexorable advance toward a galaxy that had never known true hunger. If you want to see more crossover threats enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a universe you'd want to see clash with the Empire in the comments below. May the Force be with you. On Coruscant in the Emperor's throne room, Darth Vader paused mid-conversation. For just a moment, he felt something impossible, a blank space in the Force where stars should shine. Then it was gone, and he dismissed it as a momentary disturbance. He would not make that mistake again. The mining colony on Savareen had survived Imperial occupation, corporate exploitation, and even a brief rebel raid that destroyed half their fuel depot. 3,000 colonists called the dusty Red World home, extracting valuable cortosis ore from deep shaft mines that stretched kilometers beneath the surface. They were used to hardship. They were used to being forgotten by the galaxy at large. They were not used to the sky splitting open. Colony Administrator Phineas Cross was reviewing quarterly production reports when the first alarm sounded. Not proximity warnings or atmospheric alerts. Biological contamination sensors screaming that something in the upper atmosphere had triggered every pathogen detection grid simultaneously. "Get me visual confirmation," he ordered, moving to the operations center's main viewport. The sky above Savareen's capital settlement had taken on a sickly purple hue, thick with what looked like spores or pollen. Except these particles moved with purpose, drifting downward in coordinated waves that defied natural wind patterns. The first creatures landed 20 minutes later. They came in organic pods that struck the ground with wet, meaty impacts. Tyrannocytes that split open like obscene flowers to disgorge their cargo. 4-legged beasts with razor-sharp talons and elongated skulls poured out in waves. Hormagaunts, though the colonists had no name for them yet. They moved with terrifying speed, their chitinous bodies gleaming in Savareen's dual sunset. The colony's security forces opened fire immediately. Blaster bolts carved through chitin and flesh, dropping the first wave of creatures in smoking heaps. For a moment, Cross allowed himself hope. These things could be killed. Then the second wave arrived, and hope died screaming. These new creatures moved differently, circling, flanking, using the terrain with tactical precision that shouldn't exist in mindless beasts. A security officer's head exploded in a spray of bone and brain matter as a Termagant's flesh borer projectile punched through his helmet. The living ammunition burrowed into the corpse, feeding even as the body collapsed. "Fall back to the administration complex," Cross shouted into the comm. "Seal all entrances and—" The building's eastern wall exploded inward. A carnifex, easily 4 meters tall, forced its way through the reinforced durasteel as if it were paper. Its crushing claws seized a fleeing technician and pulled him apart with casual efficiency. The Tyranid's maw opened, revealing rows of teeth designed for one purpose: consumption. Cross activated the emergency beacon, sending out a broad-spectrum distress call that would reach Imperial monitoring stations within hours. This is Savarine Colony. We are under attack by unknown Xenos forces, requesting immediate military intervention. Casualties are severe. I repeat." Through the viewport, he watched his world die. The creatures were everywhere now, swarming through streets, pulling colonists from their homes, dragging them toward collection points where larger organisms waited. Some colonists were consumed on the spot, their biomass absorbed with terrible efficiency. Others were wrapped in organic resin and carried toward the growing biostructures that now dominated the colony's outskirts. A woman's scream cut off abruptly. A child's cry for his mother went unanswered. The blaster fire grew sporadic, then stopped entirely. Cross found himself alone in the operations center, watching through security feeds as his people became food. The creatures didn't torture. They didn't gloat or celebrate. They simply consumed, converted, and moved on with the mechanical efficiency of a factory processing raw materials. His console chimed. An incoming transmission. Imperial Navy frequency. Savarine Colony, this is Imperial Star Destroyer Inexorable. We have received your distress call and are en route. Estimated arrival, 4 hours. Hold your position and... The Imperial officer's voice faltered. "Colony, are you still reading us?" "They're eating us," Cross whispered. "Everything, everyone. They're eating the whole damn planet." "Say again, Colony." "You're breaking up." A warrior-formed Tyranid crashed through the operations center door, its bone-sword arms already swinging. Cross had just enough time to see his reflection in those dead alien eyes before the blade took his head from his shoulders. 4 hours later, the Inexorable dropped out of hyperspace to find Savarine transformed. The colony was gone, replaced by towering spires of living tissue that pulsed with bioluminescence. Vast pools of digestive fluid covered what had once been residential sectors, and the creatures, thousands upon thousands of them, turned their attention skyward. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from those organic structures," the tactical officer reported. "They're weapons. Captain, they're targeting us." The biocannons fired. Streams of corrosive venom and bioplasma lanced through the void, striking the Star Destroyer's shields with force that made the entire ship shudder. The Empire's finest warship, designed to cow entire systems into submission, found itself under assault from an enemy that had evolved weapons specifically designed to kill ships. "Return fire! All batteries!" Captain Thessian roared. Turbo-laser batteries opened up, carving burning furrows through the organic structures below. Tyranids died by the hundreds, their bodies vaporized or blown apart. But for every creature killed, the others adapted. The third volley found the Tyranids dispersing, using the terrain for cover, their carapaces already showing signs of increased thermal resistance. "Captain, we're detecting launch signatures, dozens of them. No, hundreds. Those spore things are coming straight for us." Mycetic spores, each one carrying fresh organisms bred for void combat, rocketed toward the Inexorable on trails of bioplasma. The point defense systems worked overtime, destroying most before they could reach the hull. Most, but not all. The first spore impacted near the dorsal sensor array, splitting open to release genestealers, swift, intelligent killers designed for boarding actions. They scuttled across the hull with magnetic limbs, seeking entry points. Darth Vader stood alone in his meditation chamber aboard the Executor, his superstar destroyer cutting through hyperspace toward the outer rim. The chamber's walls were polished obsidian, reflecting nothing. A void within a void, where the Dark Lord of the Sith could commune with the Force without distraction. Except tonight, the Force would not answer. He reached outward with his consciousness, seeking the familiar currents of anger and fear that permeated the galaxy. The Empire's iron grip created a constant stream of suffering that fed the dark side, a banquet of negative emotion that Vader could draw upon at will. But now, at the edge of his perception, he felt absence, not silence. Silence implied the potential for sound. This was negation, a blank space in the Force where entire star systems should have registered. Savareen, Ord, Mantell, Ryloth. Worlds he had felt only days ago now existed as holes in the cosmic tapestry, as if something had reached into reality and torn them away. Vader's breathing apparatus hissed rhythmically in the darkness, his mechanical hand clenched, servo motors whining. "My master," he spoke into the chamber's comm system, "I must speak with you." The holographic projector activated, casting Emperor Palpatine's hooded form in flickering blue light. Even through the distortion, Vader could sense his master's irritation at being disturbed. "What is it, Lord Vader?" "I am occupied with the Death Star's construction schedule. I have felt a disturbance in the Force. Multiple systems in the unknown regions and outer rim have vanished from my perception. It is as if they have been consumed." Palpatine's expression remained hidden beneath his hood, but Vader sensed a flicker of interest. "Consumed? Explain yourself." "I cannot, my master. When I attempt to reach toward these systems with the Force, I encounter something that should not exist, a shadow that repels all connection. It is growing, spreading. I have never encountered anything like it." "The Force is absolute, Lord Vader. Nothing exists beyond its reach. Perhaps your connection has weakened. The damage to your body is not the cause," Vader interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled anger. "I know my own limitations, Master. This is external. Something has entered our galaxy that the Force cannot touch." The Emperor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his tone had shifted from dismissive to calculating. "I have received reports of attacks on Imperial holdings in those sectors, Xenos creatures of unknown origin. Admiral Thessian's Star Destroyer was forced to retreat from Savareen after sustaining heavy casualties. He described the attackers as biological in nature, highly adaptive, and impossibly numerous." "Then you have felt it as well." "I have felt disruption, nothing more. These creatures are a military concern, not a mystical one. The Imperial Navy will handle them as they have handled every other threat to our order." Vader wanted to argue to make his master understand that this was different, but decades of service had taught him when Palpatine's mind was closed to alternative perspectives. Instead, he changed tactics. "Allow me to investigate personally, if these creatures are indeed what I suspect. The Empire will need more than Star Destroyers to stop them." "Very well. But do not neglect your primary duties. The Rebel Alliance remains our priority. These Xenos, however formidable, are merely animals. They will learn to fear the Empire's might, or they will be exterminated." The hologram flickered out, leaving Vader alone in darkness once more. He reached out again with the Force, focusing on the shadow at the edge of perception. This time he pushed deeper, forcing his consciousness toward the void, regardless of the resistance. Pain lanced through his mind, not physical but psychic, as if his thoughts were scraping against something fundamentally incompatible with the Force itself. Images flooded his awareness, not visions granted by the Force, but sensations leaking through from the other side of that terrible shadow. Hunger, not the hunger of starvation, but the hunger of purpose, an imperative coded into every cell of a vast and ancient organism. Consumption, adaptation, evolution, no malice, no hatred. Just the simple, terrible certainty that all biomass existed to be consumed and repurposed. Vader gasped, his organic hand clutching the armrest of his meditation throne. The Hive Mind had noticed his intrusion. For a fraction of a second, something incomprehensibly vast had turned its attention toward him, regarding him with the interest a human might show toward a particularly nutritious insect. Then the connection severed and Vader was alone again. His breathing came faster now, the medical apparatus struggling to compensate for his elevated stress levels. In all his years serving the dark side, facing Jedi masters and ancient Sith spirits, he had never encountered anything like this. The Tyranids, for he had no other name for them, existed outside the natural order. They were a hunger-given form, a galactic predator that viewed the Force itself as an obstacle to be worked around. And they were coming. Vader activated the Executor's intercom. Navigation, plot a course to the Savarine system. Maximum speed. Inform Admiral Piet that I will be taking command of the investigation personally. At once, Lord Vader. As his flagship adjusted course, Vader returned his attention to the shadow in the Force. It had grown perceptibly larger since his meditation began. Worlds were falling, their populations converted into fuel for an endless swarm. The Empire prided itself on inspiring fear, on breaking the will of its subjects through overwhelming force. But how did you intimidate something incapable of fear? How did you break the will of something that had no will, only instinct? How did you threaten something that viewed threats as simply another form of biomass to be analyzed, adapted to, and consumed? For the first time in many years, Darth Vader felt something he had almost forgotten: uncertainty. The shadow in the Force continued to spread, and the galaxy remained blissfully unaware that it had become prey. Admiral Piers Terranold commanded the Imperial Navy's 17th Sector Fleet with the same ruthless efficiency that had earned him his rank. 12 Star Destroyers, 40 cruisers, and over 200 support craft comprised his armada, more than enough firepower to subjugate entire planetary systems. When the orders came to engage the Xenos threat in the Savarine sector, Terranold approached the mission with absolute confidence. All ships exit hyperspace on my mark. Battle formation Theta 7. We'll box them in and burn them out, he announced from the Dominance's bridge. These creatures may have surprised Captain Thessian, but they're about to learn why the Empire rules the galaxy. The fleet dropped into real space simultaneously, their wedge-shaped hulls emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation. Terranold's tactical display lit up immediately with contacts, thousands of them, scattered across the Savarine system like a swarm of insects. Contacts confirmed. Multiple biological vessels ranging from starfighter analog size to capital ship displacement. Admiral, they're moving to intercept. All of them. Terranold watched the tactical display with growing unease. The Tyranid bioships weren't fleeing or adopting defensive positions. They were attacking, coordinating their movements with a precision that rivaled the Imperial Navy's own fleet doctrine. All batteries, open fire, show them Imperial might. Green turbo laser fire lanced across the void. The first volley was devastating. Dozens of Tyranid organisms vaporized in brilliant explosions of superheated biomass. Terranold allowed himself a thin smile. Whatever these creatures were, they died like anything else when hit with enough firepower. Then the second wave arrived and everything changed. The Tyranids that survived the initial barrage moved differently now. They scattered, juked, and rolled with an agility that shouldn't exist in organisms of their size. Terranold's smile vanished as he watched a Kraken-class bioship spiral around a turbo laser blast that should have obliterated it. "They're learning," his tactical officer whispered. "Admiral, they're adapting to our firing patterns." "Impossible. They're animals. Recalibrate targeting computers and fire again." The second volley achieved less than half the kill rate of the first. The third volley was even less effective as the Tyranids began using debris fields and asteroid cover with tactical sophistication. And all the while, they drew closer. Incoming projectiles, spore mines deploying across our formation. The Tyranids had launched their own counterattack. Living minds drifted through space on bioplasma propulsion, each one a cluster of toxic compounds and explosive enzymes. The Imperial point defense systems engaged, destroying most. But dozens slipped through. The cruiser Retribution took 3 spore mine impacts along its starboard hull. The mines didn't explode conventionally. They erupted in clouds of corrosive gas that ate through durasteel plating like acid. Atmosphere vented from multiple breaches, carrying screaming crew members into the void. Retribution reporting critical damage, hull breaches on decks 4 through 9, casualties mounting. Tyranids gripped the command railing. Deploy all TIE fighter squadrons. Drive them back. Hundreds of TIE fighters screamed from hangar bays, their twin ion engines blazing. They engaged the smaller Tyranid organisms in a swirling dogfight that filled the space between capital ships. For a few minutes, it seemed the Imperial pilots had the advantage, their speed and maneuverability allowing them to outpace the biological flyers. Then the Tyranids adapted again. Admiral, the enemy flyers are changing tactics. They're predicting our pilots' movements. It's like they know what we're going to do before we do it. On the tactical display, Tyranids watched in horror as TIE fighter kill rates plummeted. The Tyranid flyers, gargoyles, and harpies had analyzed Imperial fighter doctrine and evolved counter-tactics in real time. They moved as a unified swarm, cutting off escape routes, herding Imperial fighters into kill zones where larger organisms waited with bioplasma. A Hive ship, massive as any Star Destroyer, surged forward through the Imperial formation. Its carapace bore scorch marks from turbo-laser impacts, but it kept coming. Biocannons along its flanks opened fire, launching streams of living projectiles that splattered against the Dominance's shields. Shields holding at 70% weight. Admiral, those projectiles are eating through the shield energy itself. They're some kind of bioelectric organism that feeds on power. Rotate shield frequency, increase output to maximum. Already trying, sir. They're adapting faster than we can rotate. The Hive ship closed to point-blank range, and Tyranids finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't a fleet. It was a single organism with thousands of bodies, all sharing information instantaneously through some kind of psychic network. Every tactic the Imperial Navy employed was catalogued, analyzed, and countered within minutes. Every weapon's weakness was identified and exploited. Every predictable maneuver was anticipated and punished. All ships, fall back, retreat to... The Dominance shuddered as something massive impacted its underside. On the exterior cameras, Tyranids saw them. Boarding organisms, each one the size of a small transport, latched onto the hull like parasites. Their acidic secretions ate through armor plating, creating breaches large enough for smaller creatures to pour through. Security teams to all breach points, seal the... Screaming erupted over the ship-wide comm. Not coordinated defense, but panic. The creatures were inside, rampaging through corridors with a speed and ferocity that overwhelmed the stormtrooper detachments. Genestealers tore through armor with ease. Hormagaunts flooded companionways in numbers that made defensive fire almost irrelevant. Tyranids made the hardest decision of his career. All ships capable of hyperspace, execute emergency jump. Abandon anyone who can't make it. We have to warn Coruscant. 7 Star Destroyers managed to escape, their hyperdrives spooling up just fast enough to carry them away. 5 remained behind, overwhelmed by boarding parties or too damaged to flee. The Dominance was among them. Admiral Tyranids watched his crew die on security feeds, pulled apart by creatures that saw them as nothing more than raw materials. In his final moments, he understood Captain Moore's last transmission. These things couldn't be stopped with conventional warfare. They learned too quickly, adapted too efficiently, consumed too thoroughly. The bridge doors exploded inward. A Tyranid warrior strode through the wreckage, its bone zords dripping with blood. Tyranids reached for his sidearm, knowing it was futile. The creature killed him quickly. The Hive Mind had no interest in prolonging suffering, only in acquiring biomass efficiently. The Rebel Alliance leadership gathered in a converted cargo freighter drifting through the Outer Rim, far from Imperial surveillance. Mon Mothma sat at the head of the makeshift conference table, her expression grave as she reviewed the intelligence reports scattered before her. General John Dodonna stood nearby, holographic star charts flickering above the projector. Princess Leia Organa leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, her face troubled. 7 Star Destroyers, Dodonna repeated, still struggling to process the information. 7 Imperial Star Destroyers forced to retreat from a single engagement. The Empire hasn't suffered losses like that since ever. Our intelligence network confirms it, Mon Mothma said quietly. Admiral Tyranids' fleet was decimated. The survivors report creatures that adapt to Imperial weapons in real time, that board ships and slaughter entire crews. They're calling it the Tyranid threat. Leia pushed off from the wall. And these Tyranids are consuming entire worlds, not occupying them, consuming them. Every scrap of organic matter, confirmed Admiral Akbar, his gravelly voice heavy with concern. Our scouts observed the aftermath of their attack on Ryloth. The planet's surface is covered in organic structures. The Twi'lek population, millions of people, simply gone, converted into more of these creatures. The room fell silent. The Rebel Alliance had fought for years against the Empire's tyranny, dreaming of liberation and restoration of the Republic. But this threat was something else entirely, an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be converted to their cause, couldn't even comprehend the concept of freedom they fought for. Then we have our answer, said General Riken. We let them destroy each other. The Empire has the resources to fight this threat. Let Palpatine spend his fleets and armies against these Tyranids. When both sides are exhausted, we strike and reclaim the galaxy. No, Leia's voice cut through the room like a blade. We can't. Princess, with respect, this is a strategic opportunity we may never see again. Strategic opportunity, Leia's eyes flashed with anger. Millions are dying. Entire species are being wiped out. You're suggesting we stand by and watch genocide because it's convenient for our cause. I'm suggesting we prioritize the Alliance's survival, Riken countered. We don't have the firepower to fight both the Empire and these Tyranids. If we commit our forces now, we'll be destroyed along with everything else. Mon Mothma raised a hand, silencing the argument. The princess raises a valid moral concern, but General Riken is correct about our limited resources. We must consider what we can realistically accomplish. Dodonna activated the star chart, highlighting systems that had gone dark over the past 3 weeks. Red markers spread like a disease across the Outer Rim, creeping inexorably toward the Mid-Rim and core worlds. The Tyranids are advancing on multiple fronts. Based on their current trajectory, they'll reach Bothaui within 2 weeks, Corellia within a month. If they maintain this pace, Coruscant itself becomes threatened within 6 months. The Empire will never let them reach Coruscant, Akbar observed. Palpatine will throw everything he has at them long before that. And if the Empire falls, Leia asked, what then? Who fights the Tyranids after they've consumed the Imperial Navy? Us, with our handful of capital ships and stolen corvettes. The question hung in the air, unanswerable. A new voice spoke from the doorway, Commander Skywalker, fresh from a patrol mission in the Outer Rim. I felt them, through the Force, or rather I felt the absence where they are. It's like a void, a shadow that blocks out everything. I've never sensed anything like it. Can you use the Force against them? Mon Mothma asked. Luke shook his head slowly. I don't think so. It's not that they resist the Force. They exist outside it somehow. When I tried to reach out toward the area where they're advancing, I felt nothing. Just hunger. Vast and ancient and unstoppable. Then the Jedi are useless against them, Riai Khan said. Another reason to let the Empire handle it. Begging your pardon, General, but you're wrong. All eyes turned to a ragged-looking intelligence officer who had just entered, Lieutenant Torin Brass, one of their deep-cover operatives. I've been monitoring Imperial communications. The Empire is losing. Badly. They're not adapting fast enough. Every engagement teaches these Tyranids how to fight us better, and they're reproducing faster than the Empire can kill them. Impossible, Recon scoffed. The Empire has unlimited resources. The Empire has finite resources, Brass corrected. And the Tyranids turn every casualty into more of themselves. Every world they consume gives them more biomass to create more creatures. It's exponential growth. The Empire's losses are linear. Do the math. Mon Mothma's face had gone pale. You're saying the Empire will fall. I'm saying if we don't help them, the galaxy falls. All of it. These things don't take prisoners. They don't establish occupation governments. They eat entire biospheres and move on. There won't be a galaxy left to liberate. Leia stepped forward. Then we have to contact the Empire. Propose a temporary alliance. They'll never agree, Dodonna said. Palpatine would rather let the galaxy burn than acknowledge he needs help from rebels. Darth Vader might, Luke said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. I've encountered him. He's pragmatic in a way the Emperor isn't. If he understands the threat, he might be willing to coordinate efforts, even if it's not an official alliance. Mon Mothma looked around the room, seeing the fear and uncertainty on every face. They had spent years fighting for freedom, and now they faced a choice that had no good options: help their greatest enemy survive, or watch the galaxy be consumed by an even worse threat. We'll send a covert transmission to Imperial forces, she decided. Not an alliance, but an information exchange. We share what we know about Tyranid patterns and weaknesses, assuming we find any, and they do the same. No promises, no treaties, just survival. And if the Empire betrays us, Riakin asked, then at least we'll die knowing we tried to save lives instead of counting on mass slaughter to win our war for us. Emperor Palpatine stood before the vast, transparent steel viewport of his throne room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the endless traffic streams of Coruscant's sky lanes. Behind him, a dozen Imperial officers stood at rigid attention, each one responsible for sectors now threatened by the Tyranid advance. They had been summoned to explain their failures. None of them expected to leave this room with their careers or lives intact. 17 systems lost, Palpatine said, his voice soft and venomous. Over 1 trillion Imperial subjects consumed. 400 billion credits in military assets destroyed or abandoned, and you tell me these creatures are animals? Grand Moff Tarkin, one of the few men present who seemed unshaken, stepped forward. My Emperor, the Death Star nears completion, yeah? A single demonstration of its power against a Tyranid-held world would waste our ultimate weapon on vermin, Palpatine interrupted, turning to face his officers. Even through his hooded visage, the weight of his displeasure was palpable. The Death Star is designed to intimidate Governor Tarkin, to break the will of rebellious populations. These creatures have no will to break. They do not fear death. They do not understand intimidation. They simply consume. Then we establish a defensive perimeter, suggested Admiral Ozzel, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. Concentrate our forces along the mid-rim, fortify key systems, and surrender the outer rim, abandon billions of Imperial citizens to these monsters? Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed with dark amusement. Tell me, Admiral, how long before the Tyranids consume those systems and turn their attention to your defensive perimeter? How long before they bring fleets 10 times larger than what they field now, all built from the biomass of worlds you abandoned? Orsil had no answer. Director Krennic, always eager to promote his own projects, cleared his throat. The Empire's manufacturing capacity remains unmatched. We can produce weapons specifically designed to counter these creatures. Incendiary warheads, biological toxins, orbital bombardment platforms, which they will adapt to, Palpatine said, his patience clearly exhausting. Have you not read the tactical reports? Every weapon we deploy becomes less effective with each subsequent engagement. They learn. They evolve. They become immune to our strategies faster than we can develop new ones. The throne room fell silent. Palpatine turned back to the viewport, watching a refugee transport drift past, one of dozens arriving hourly, carrying survivors from the outer rim. The Emperor had ordered them quarantined on Coruscant's lower levels, far from the sight of the political elite. Panic was a contagion he could not allow to spread. My lord, Tarkin ventured carefully, perhaps this threat requires unconventional solutions. There are weapons in the Imperial archives, Sith technologies from the ancient wars, super weapons that would take years to construct and deploy, Palpatine finished. We do not have years, Governor. We have months, perhaps weeks, before these creatures begin threatening core worlds. An aide rushed into the throne room, forgetting protocol in his haste. My Emperor, forgive the intrusion. We've received a coded transmission. It's from the Rebel Alliance. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Palpatine turned slowly, dark amusement replacing his anger. The rebels wish to surrender? How convenient. No, my lord. They're offering intelligence sharing, information about Tyranid movement patterns in exchange for Imperial tactical data. They claim to have observed weaknesses in the creature's coordination when... Lies, spat Admiral Motti. Obviously a trap. They want access to our fleet movements, so they can... So they can what, Admiral? Palpatine's voice dripped with contempt. Strike at us while we're defending the galaxy from extinction. Even Mon Mothma is not that foolish. He was silent for a moment, considering. Have the transmission analyzed. If their intelligence proves accurate, we will entertain their overture, temporarily. My lord, surely you don't mean to cooperate with terrorists? I mean to survive, Admiral Motti. And I expect my officers to do the same or be replaced by those who can. The threat was clear. Now leave me, all of you except Governor Tarkin. The officers fled gratefully, leaving only Tarkin standing before the Emperor's throne. When they were alone, Palpatine descended the steps, his expression contemplative. You sense it as well, old friend, he said quietly, the disruption in the Force. I am not Force-sensitive, my lord, but yes, I've noticed your distraction during our strategic sessions. Palpatine moved to a secured terminal, activating a holographic display that showed the galaxy with vast red sections marking Tyranid-controlled space. Lord Vader reported a shadow in the Force, systems that vanish from all psychic perception. At first, I dismissed his concerns, but I have felt it now myself. When I reach out with the dark side toward these infected regions, I encounter something that should not exist. What do you encounter, my lord? Nothing. Absolute nothing. The Force flows around these creatures like water around stone. They exist outside the natural order, Tarkin. Outside everything the Sith have studied for millennia. I cannot dominate them. I cannot destroy them with Force lightning or manipulation. They are immune not through resistance, but through absence. They simply do not participate in the Force at all. For the first time in years, Tarkin heard something unexpected in his Emperor's voice. Uncertainty. This threatens everything we've built, Palpatine continued. An empire founded on the power of the dark side faces an enemy that cannot be touched by that power. If the Tyranids cannot be stopped, if they consume world after world, the people will realize that the Force, and by extension their Emperor, is not absolute. They will lose faith, and faith is the only thing holding this empire together. Then we must destroy them quickly before that realization spreads. Yes. Palpatine's hands clenched into fists. But how does one destroy a hunger that grows stronger with every defeat we suffer? Neither man had an answer. Outside, another refugee ship settled onto a landing platform, carrying survivors with stories of worlds devoured and populations consumed. Stories that would spread through Coruscant's lower levels like wildfire, no matter how many informants the Empire deployed to suppress them. The Emperor returned to his throne, his expression hardening into resolve. Summon Lord Vader. It is time he led the response personally, and contact our xenobiological research divisions. I want every captured specimen studied, dissected, analyzed. These creatures must have a weakness. Everything has a weakness. And if they don't, my lord? Palpatine's smile was cold and terrible. Then we will create one. Jabba the Hutt had ruled his criminal empire for over 6 centuries, surviving rivals, Republic crackdowns, and Imperial taxation through a combination of cunning, brutality, and an extensive network of informants. His palace on Tatooine was a fortress, protected by hired mercenaries, automated defenses, and the reputation that crossing Jabba meant a slow, painful death. He had weathered every threat the galaxy could throw at him, until the sky above Mos Eisley turned purple with spores. Mighty Jabba, his major domo Bib Fortuna stammered, the reports from our holdings on Nal Hutta, they cannot be accurate. Entire cities consumed in days. Impossible. Jabba's massive bulk rippled with displeasure as he watched the holoprojector display grainy footage from his homeworld. The Hutt criminal empire stretched across dozens of systems, built on smuggling, slavery, and spice trafficking. Nal Hutta was its heart, a polluted, toxic world that only Hutts could truly call home. And now it was dying. The footage showed organic towers erupting from Nal Hutta's swamps, their bioluminescent surfaces pulsing with alien life. Hutt strongholds that had stood for millennia were overrun by creatures that moved with coordinated savagery. The great Hutt families, Desiligic, Besadi, and Jillik, were falling one by one, their vast bodies dragged toward digestion pools by creatures too numerous to count. Contact our operations on Tatooine, Ryloth, and Kessel, Jabba rumbled in Hutse. Consolidate all forces, hire every bounty hunter and mercenary available. I want defenses. Mighty Jabba, interrupted one of his communication officers. Ryloth has gone silent. All transmissions ceased 18 hours ago. The throne room fell deathly quiet. Ryloth was a major hub for Jabba's slave trade, housing thousands of Twi'lek prisoners awaiting transport to buyers across the galaxy. If it had fallen as quickly as the reports suggested, that meant the Tyranids were moving faster than any fleet could travel. How? Jabba demanded. How do they move between systems without hyperspace signatures? They don't use hyperspace, Lord Jabba, explained one of his technical advisors, a Rhodian who had once worked for the Republic military. Our scouts report they travel through real space using some form of bioplasma propulsion, slower than hyperspace, but they send tendrils ahead, scout organisms that seed planets before the main fleet arrives. By the time you see the Hive ships, you're already infected. Jabba's tail thrashed. For the first time in centuries, he felt something he had nearly forgotten: fear. Not fear of rivals or Republic justice, but primal fear of being prey. His species had clawed their way to the top of the galactic food chain through cunning and cruelty. These Tyranids operated on a simpler principle: eat or be eaten. "We leave Tatooine," Jabba announced. "Prepare my sail barge and flagship. We relocate to..." "To where, mighty Jabba?" Bib Fortuna asked quietly. "The Tyranids are in Hutt space. They're in the outer rim. They're moving toward the core. Where in the galaxy is safe?" Before Jabba could answer, the palace shook. Not from external bombardment, but from something underneath, something burrowing up through Tatooine's desert sands. What was that? The structural sensors lit up with contacts, dozens of them moving through the ground beneath the palace with impossible speed. Jabba's security chief, a scarred Weequay, activated the external cameras. The screens showed the desert around the palace erupting as Trigon organisms burst from beneath. Serpentine creatures with blade-like limbs designed for underground assault. "Sound the alarm. Seal all entrances. Get every guard to defensive positions." The palace descended into chaos. Gamorrean guards rushed to secure blasts these doors while Jabba's dancers and servants fled screaming through corridors. The first creatures breached through the dungeon level, where Jabba kept his most prized prisoners. The screaming from below was brief and wet. Jabba moved with surprising speed for his bulk, his repulsor sled carrying him toward his private hangar. Bib Fortuna and a dozen guards followed, blasters drawn. Behind them, the sounds of slaughter grew closer, the distinctive screech of Tyranid organisms and the desperate blaster fire of doomed defenders. They reached the hangar to find it already compromised. Gargoyles had torn through the ceiling, their wings folding as they dropped onto the parked ships. A Genestealer tore apart a protocol droid with its rending claws, searching instinctively for organic matter. "The starboard bay," Jabba commanded. "Move!" The group fled down a maintenance corridor, the sounds of pursuit growing louder. A Gamorrean guard at the rear screamed as a Hormagaunts' talons punched through his back. The creature pulled him down, already calling the swarm to the location of prey. Jabba's yacht sat in the emergency bay, engines pre-warmed by protocol. The massive hut squeezed through the entrance as his guards laid down, covering fire. Bib Fortuna was last aboard, sealing the hatch as Tyranid organisms crashed against it. "Launch! Now!" The yacht lifted off, its repulsors screaming as it punched through the hangar's roof. Jabba watched through the viewport as his palace, his monument to power and excess, was overrun by a tide of chitinous bodies. The creatures didn't loot his treasures or claim his territory. They simply consumed everything organic and moved on. As the yacht climbed toward orbit, Jabba saw the true scope of the invasion. Mos Eisley was burning, its cantinas and spaceports consumed by organic growth. The desert itself was changing, turning from sand to something wet and pulsing. And in the distance, massive Hive ships descended through Tatooine's atmosphere like harbingers of extinction. "Set course for Imperial space," Jabba ordered, his voice hollow. "Send word to all Hutt clans still capable of receiving transmissions. Hutt space is lost. We must seek accommodation with the Empire." Bib Fortuna stared at his master in shock. "The Empire? They've tried to tax and control us for years. They'll use this crisis to destroy what remains of Hutt independence. There is no Hutt independence if we're all consumed, Jabba roared. Contact Imperial authorities. Inform them that Jabba the Hutt offers his fleet, his resources, and his knowledge of Outer Rim routes in exchange for protection. Pride means nothing to the dead. As the yacht jumped to hyperspace, leaving Tatooine to its fate, Jabba felt the weight of defeat. His empire had been built on the suffering of others. Now he understood what it felt like to be prey, to run, to hide, to beg for mercy from powers that had once feared him. The Tyranids had done what the Republic and Empire never could. They had broken Jabba the Hutt. The world-designated Imperial Archive designation 227 Theta had no official name. It had been a minor Imperial research outpost before the Tyranids consumed it 3 weeks ago. Now it was a nightmare of organic architecture, towering capillary towers that pulsed with absorbed nutrients, digestion pools that bubbled with dissolved biomass, and thousands upon thousands of Tyranid organisms patrolling the transformed landscape. Darth Vader stood at the viewport of his shuttle, watching the corrupted planet grow larger as they descended through clouds thick with spores. Beside him, dressed in unmarked combat gear, stood 3 figures who should have been his enemies: Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia Organa, and the Wookiee Chewbacca. "This is insane," Leia muttered, checking her blaster for the 5th time. "Working with the Empire." "Working with him. Temporary alliance of necessity," Vader replied, his mechanical breathing filling the cramped shuttle. "You want intelligence on these creatures. So do I. What better source than a world they've already consumed?" Luke hadn't spoken since they departed the rendezvous point. Through the Force, Vader could sense the young Jedi's turmoil, recognition, fear, anger, and beneath it all, a curiosity about the shadow that even now pressed against their consciousness. The Tyranid psychic presence was stronger here, in proximity to an infested world. It felt like drowning in an ocean of hunger. "Can you feel them?" Luke asked quietly. "Yes, the shadow is overwhelming at this range. It is taking considerable effort to maintain my connection to the Force." Vader did not mention that this was the first time in decades he had struggled to touch the dark side. The Hive Mind's presence disrupted everything, creating a psychic dead zone that made even his augmented senses feel muffled and distant. The shuttle touched down on what had once been the research facility's landing pad. Now it was overgrown with a carpet of organic matter that squelched beneath their boots as they disembarked. The air was thick, humid, and tasted of copper and decay. "Stay close," Vader commanded, igniting his crimson lightsaber. The blade's hum seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. "The creatures are attracted to movement and sound. We have perhaps an hour before they locate us in force." They moved through the transformed facility like ghosts, passing through corridors where walls had been replaced by ribbed chitin and floors had become spongy flesh. Imperial equipment lay scattered and half-dissolved, evidence of the researchers who had died here. Chewbacca growled low in his throat, his bowcaster tracking every shadow. "There," Vader indicated a sealed laboratory deep within the structure. The research team was studying captured specimens before the facility fell. Their data may still be intact. Luke used the Force to wrench open the twisted door, revealing a laboratory that was mercifully still mostly mechanical. Computer terminals flickered with emergency power, and several containment cells lined the far wall. Most were empty, their contents having escaped when the facility was overrun, but one cell still held an occupant. The Tyranid warrior was very much alive, its 4 arms pressed against the containment field as it watched them with compound eyes that gleamed with alien intelligence. The creature was approximately 2 meters tall, its carapace bearing scorch marks from weapons fire. But it was the way it looked at them that was most disturbing, not with animal hunger, but with something that resembled curiosity. "It's studying us," Leia whispered. "As we study it," Vader replied, moving to the nearest terminal. His gloved fingers worked the controls with surprising dexterity, pulling up research logs from the weeks before the facility fell. The researchers made significant discoveries before they died. The logs painted a grim picture. The Tyranids were not merely animals acting on instinct, they were weapons, bioforms created by the Hive Mind with specific tactical purposes. The warrior in the cell had been bred for command functions, coordinating swarms through synaptic links. When the researchers tried to sever those links through psychic dampening fields, the creature had simply adapted, growing new neural pathways within hours. "They tried everything," Luke read over Vader's shoulder. "Toxins, extreme temperatures, radiation, sonic weapons. The Tyranids adapted to all of it. Within 2 or 3 exposures, they became effectively immune." "There must be something," Leia insisted. "No creature is invulnerable." Vader scrolled through more data. The researchers identified one potential weakness before the facility was overrun. The Hive Mind's coordination comes at a cost. Individual Tyranids have limited autonomous function. Severe their connection to the greater whole, and they become disoriented, easier to kill. "How do you sever a psychic connection across star systems?" Luke asked. "You don't, but you can disrupt it locally." The researchers theorized that sufficient psychic interference, force lightning on a massive scale, or specialized jamming equipment might create temporary blind spots in the Hive Mind's awareness. A screech echoed through the facility. Then another. The Tyranids had found them. "We need to leave. Now." Vader copied the research data onto a portable drive and turned toward the exit. "Wait." Luke approached the containment cell, staring at the warrior within. Through the Force, or rather, through the absence where the Force should be, he could sense the creature's alien consciousness. Not malice, not evil, just purpose. Consume, adapt, survive. The Tyranid was no more evil than a virus. "Luke, we don't have time for philosophy," Leia urged as the screeching grew closer. The young Jedi ignited his lightsaber and drove it through the containment cell's power supply. The field collapsed, freeing the warrior. The creature stood motionless for a moment, regarding Luke with what might have been recognition. Then it turned and charged toward the approaching sounds of its kin, buying them precious seconds to escape. "Why?" Vader demanded as they ran. "Because it deserved a warrior's death," Luke replied. "Not captivity while its world burns." They emerged from the facility to find their shuttle surrounded by hormagaunts and termagants, dozens of them, with more emerging from the organic growth by the second. Vader's lightsaber carved through chitin and flesh, while Chewbacca's bowcaster sent explosive quarrels into the swarm. Leia's blaster fire was precise and deadly, but for every Tyranid they killed, 2 more took its place. "The shuttle!" Luke shouted, using the Force to hurl a cluster of Tyranids away from their escape route. They fought their way aboard, the boarding ramp closing just as a Genestealer's claws scraped across its surface. The shuttle lifted off, its underbelly taking hits from bioplasma fire that scorched but didn't breach the hull. As they cleared the atmosphere, Vader secured the research data and turned to his unlikely allies. "The information we've gathered will be shared with both Imperial and Rebel Command. The researchers' theory about psychic disruption may be our only advantage." "It won't be enough," Luke said quietly, still feeling the weight of the Hive Mind's shadow pressing against his consciousness. "They're too many. They adapt too quickly. Even if we can disrupt them locally, they'll just evolve around it eventually." For once, Darth Vader had no counter-argument. They had witnessed firsthand what the galaxy was facing, an enemy that learned from every defeat, that turned every casualty into fuel for expansion, that could not be reasoned with or intimidated. The shuttle jumped to hyperspace, carrying its precious cargo of intelligence and the terrible knowledge that it might not be enough to save them. Emperor Palpatine descended into the deepest level of the Imperial Palace, a place few living beings had ever seen. The chamber was ancient, predating even the Jedi temple that once stood on Coruscant's surface. Here, in darkness lit only by crimson emergency lighting, the Emperor had gathered artifacts and knowledge from millennia of Sith history. Holocrons containing the wisdom of Darth Bane, Darth Revan, and a dozen other Dark Lords lined the walls. At the chamber's center stood a meditation sphere, a Sith construct designed to amplify force power to unimaginable levels. Today, Palpatine would use it to accomplish what no Sith had attempted in 1,000 years, dominate an alien consciousness through sheer force of will. "My lord, are you certain this is wise?" Darth Vader stood at the chamber's entrance, his concern evident even through his mask's vocabulator. The research data suggests the Hive Mind exists partially outside the Force. Attempting to dominate it could what, Lord Vader? Fail? Palpatine's yellow eyes gleamed with dark ambition. "I have toppled the Jedi Order. I have brought an entire galaxy to heal. I have touched the deepest wellsprings of the dark side and emerged stronger. This hive mind, vast as it may be, is still merely consciousness, and consciousness can be dominated. Or it could consume you, Master." Palpatine smiled coldly. "Then you will rule in my stead. But I do not intend to fail. The Tyranids advance on a dozen fronts. Our fleets are in retreat. Our worlds burn. If I do nothing, the Empire, everything we have built, will be devoured within months. I will not allow that." He entered the meditation sphere, settling into its center as ancient mechanisms hummed to life. Dark side energy began to coalesce around him, drawn from the nexus of suffering that was Coruscant's lower levels. Trillions of beings lived in fear and misery on this world, their negative emotions a banquet for those who knew how to feed upon them. Palpatine drew it all in, letting the dark side fill him until his body could barely contain the power. His consciousness expanded outward, reaching beyond Coruscant, beyond the core worlds, toward the shadow at the edge of his perception. The Hive Mind. Contact. It was like plunging into an ocean of hunger. Not the passionate hunger of a Sith seeking power, but cold biological imperative, encoded into every cell of trillions upon trillions of organisms. Palpatine pushed deeper, trying to find the core consciousness, the central will he could dominate and bend to his purpose. But there was no core. The Hive Mind was not a singular entity, but a collective. Every Tyranid, from the smallest Ripper to the largest hive ship, contributed to its consciousness. It had no center, no weak point, no throne upon which a tyrant sat. It was distributed, awareness, redundant, and adaptive. Palpatine tried to impose his will anyway, projecting commands with the full force of his dark side mastery. Obey. Cease. Withdraw. The Hive Mind noticed him. It was not like being observed by another Force sensitive. It was like being noticed by a predator, assessed, catalogued, analyzed as either threat or food. The Hive Mind's attention turned fully upon Palpatine's consciousness, examining it with the same detached curiosity a scientist might show a bacterial culture. Then it pushed back. Palpatine screamed, not in his physical body, but across the psychic link he had foolishly opened. The Hive Mind did not attack with malice or hatred. It simply existed, its presence so vast and overwhelming that it crushed his consciousness beneath its weight. He tried to withdraw, to sever the connection, but the Hive Mind had recognized him as part of the galaxy's biomass. It reached for him through the link, trying to understand what he was, how he functioned, whether his unique properties could be assimilated. In the meditation chamber, Palpatine's physical body convulsed. Dark side lightning arced from his fingertips uncontrollably, scorching the ancient walls. Vader rushed forward but stopped, unsure how to help without being caught in the psychic backlash. Palpatine saw through a million alien eyes, saw worlds being consumed, populations being processed, biomass being converted into new forms. He felt the hunger that drove them, endless and patient. The Hive Mind did not hate the galaxy, it simply needed to feed. Every species, every civilization, every living thing was fuel for its expansion. The concept of negotiation or mercy did not exist within its consciousness because such concepts required individual identity, which the Tyranids had abandoned in favor of collective efficiency. And it was evolving. Even now, in the seconds of their contact, the Hive Mind was analyzing Palpatine's use of the Force, learning, adapting. Future bioforms would be resistant to such attacks, bred with psychic dampening organs or neural configurations that naturally deflected Force manipulation. "You cannot dominate us," the Hive Mind communicated, not in words, but in pure conceptual understanding. "You are biomass. You will be consumed." With a desperate surge of will, Palpatine severed the connection. His consciousness snapped back into his body like a rubber band stretched to breaking point. He collapsed within the meditation sphere, gasping, his aged body racked with tremors. "Master!" Vader caught him as he fell, feeling genuine alarm. In all their years together, he had never seen Palpatine so shaken. "It knows me now," Palpatine whispered, his voice hoarse. "It has analyzed how I use the Force. Future generations will be immune. I have given them a weapon against us. Then we must find another way. There is no other way." Palpatine's composure cracked, revealing the fear beneath his arrogance. "They cannot be dominated. They cannot be intimidated. They cannot be destroyed through conventional means because they adapt faster than we can deploy new weapons. They are the perfect predator, Vader, and we are prey." The Emperor slowly regained his feet, leaning heavily on Vader for support. His face looked older somehow, as if the psychic assault had aged him years in minutes. "Activate Protocol Terminus," Palpatine ordered, his voice regaining some of its strength. "If we cannot stop the Tyranids through Force, we will deny them their fuel." Vader stiffened. "Master, Protocol Terminus means—" "I know what it means. Any world that cannot be defended will be sterilized by orbital bombardment. Better to destroy 100 worlds ourselves than let them become breeding grounds for more Tyranids. We will create a barrier of dead worlds between the Tyranids and the core, a fire break that will kill billions of Imperial citizens and save trillions more. Unless you have a better solution?" Vader had none. The research from the consumed facility had offered one slim hope. Psychic disruption might slow the Tyranids locally, but the Emperor's attempt to dominate the Hive Mind had proven such tactics would only work temporarily. The Tyranids would adapt, evolve, overcome. They always did. "What of the Death Star?" Vader asked. "Its weapon could destroy infested worlds from a distance. One world at a time, while they consume hundreds." Palpatine shook his head. "But yes, accelerate its completion. We may need to destroy entire sectors to contain them." As they ascended from the chamber, Palpatine felt the shadow in the Force more clearly than ever. It was growing, spreading like a cancer across the galaxy, and somewhere in that darkness, the Hive Mind was breeding new forms. Tyranids adapted to resist Force users, designed to hunt and consume the galaxy's most powerful beings. The Emperor had ruled through fear for decades. Now, for the first time, he understood what it meant to be afraid. The Imperial fleet assembled at Corulus, what remained of it. 30 star destroyers, a fraction of the Navy's former strength, hung in formation around the half-completed Death Star. The massive battle station gleamed in the system's pale light, its super laser array finally operational. Even if the station itself was still incomplete, it would have to be enough. Darth Vader stood on the bridge of the Executor, watching the tactical display with mounting dread. Red markers indicated Tyranid-controlled space, a spreading stain that now covered nearly a third of the known galaxy. The outer rim was lost. The mid-rim was burning, and the core worlds prepared for siege. "Status report," he commanded. Admiral Piet consulted his datapad, his face ashen. "My lord, we've received confirmation that Protocol Terminus has been executed on 47 worlds. Orbital bombardment successfully sterilized all organic matter before the Tyranids could harvest it. Civilian casualties estimated at 80 billion. Vader felt nothing through the force from those dead worlds, just silence where billions of voices had once cried out in terror. The Empire had murdered its own citizens to deny the enemy resources. And still the Tyranids came. "The refugee crisis is becoming untenable," Piet continued. "Coruscant's population has swollen by 12 billion in 3 weeks. Food supplies are critical. Civil unrest is escalating in the lower levels. And the Rebel Alliance? Intelligence reports they've abandoned their base on Yavin 4. Mon Mothma transmitted coordinates for their fleet before they evacuated. They're retreating toward the deep core along with everyone else. The distinction between rebel and loyalist seems irrelevant now, my lord." A new contact appeared on the tactical display, a massive one emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. Not Tyranid bioships, but a motley collection of vessels. Hutt pleasure barges, pirate frigates, corporate freighters, even a few Mandalorian warships. The criminal underworld and independent systems all fleeing toward the core's last bastions of defense. "They're hailing us," the communications officer reported. "It's Jabba the Hutt, my lord. He says he's come to offer his services to the Empire." Any other day, Vader might have found dark amusement in the situation. Today, he simply felt tired. "Tell him to take position in the refugee convoy. We need every gun that can fire." A proximity alarm shattered the moment. The sensors had detected the Tyranid vanguard, hundreds of contacts dropping out of bioplasma propulsion at the system's outer planets. Scout organisms, but their presence meant the Hive fleets were close behind. "Sound battle stations, all ships to combat readiness. Transmit to the Death Star. Prepare to fire on my command." The fleet moved into defensive formation, creating overlapping fields of fire around Corulus and its vital facilities. This would be the first major stand since Admiral Tyranids' disastrous engagement. The Empire had learned painful lessons since then, developed new tactics, new weapons, new strategies designed specifically for fighting an adaptive enemy. It wouldn't be enough. Vader knew it in his bones, but they would fight anyway because surrender meant extinction. The Hive Fleet arrived like a plague, bioships numbering in the thousands emerging from the outer dark. They were larger than the previous fleets, their carapaces bearing adaptations that made Vader's tactical officers curse. Reflective chitin plating to deflect turbolasers, thermal dispersal organs to survive superheated plasma, redundant nervous systems to resist the psychic disruption, weapons the Empire had deployed in previous engagements. "They've adapted to everything we used against them," Piet whispered. My lord, how do we fight something that learns from every battle? We make every shot count. Fire. The Imperial fleet opened up with everything it had. Turbo laser fire carved through the void, punching through bioships with the accumulated firepower of an entire sector's military assets. Tyranid organisms died by the millions, their corpses tumbling through space. But for every one destroyed, 2 more pressed forward, and those that survived the initial barrage moved with frightening intelligence, using debris for cover and coordinating their assault vectors with precision that rivaled Imperial tactical doctrine. The first bioship reached weapons range and fired. Its bioplasma cannons had evolved. The projectiles now contained specialized organisms that fed on shield energy, boring through the Star Destroyer Relentless's defenses like acid through flesh. Secondary explosions rippled along the destroyer's hull as the living ammunition reached critical systems. Relentless is breaking up. They're evacuating. Wait, the escape pods are being intercepted by Tyranid flyers. Vader watched helplessly as rescue craft were torn apart by gargoyles and harpies that had learned to prioritize fleeing crew over military targets. The Tyranids had analyzed Imperial evacuation procedures and adapted to capitalize on them. Survivors became increasingly rare commodities. Target the Death Star's super laser on the largest concentration of bioships. Fire when ready. The unfinished battle station rotated agonizingly slowly, bringing its primary weapon to bear. Green energy gathered in the focusing dish, power equivalent to a medium star compressed into a single coherent beam. The super laser fired. The beam carved through space, catching a dozen Hive ships in its path. They vaporized instantly, their biomass unable to withstand such concentrated destruction. A cheer went up across the Imperial fleet. Finally, a weapon the Tyranids couldn't adapt to fast enough. The celebration died quickly. The Hive Mind had learned what the Death Star could do. The bioships dispersed immediately, spreading across such a wide front that the super laser could only target a fraction of their number with each shot. And the smaller organisms, tyrannocytes filled with boarding parties, dove toward the Death Star itself, sacrificing themselves in waves against its point defenses. They're going to board the station, Vader realized. Redirect all fighter squadrons to Death Star defense. We cannot lose it. But the Tyranids had planned for this too. Wave after wave of mycetic spores crashed against the Death Star's incomplete sections, exploiting gaps in its armor where construction was still ongoing. Genestealers and warriors poured into the station's corridors, overwhelming security forces through sheer numbers. On the tactical display, Vader watched the battle deteriorate into chaos. The Imperial fleet was inflicting massive casualties, millions of Tyranids dying every minute. But the Hive Mind didn't care about casualties. It cared about biomass eon efficiency, and every Imperial ship destroyed, every crew consumed, every world harvested gave it more resources to breed more organisms. My lord, we're receiving a transmission from Emperor Palpatine. It's an evacuation order for the entire fleet. Vader's fists clenched. To retreat now meant abandoning Corulus and the Death Star. It meant falling back to Coruscant itself for a last stand. It meant acknowledging that the Tyranids had won. Execute the order. All ships, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. The Death Star's crew is to evacuate immediately. My lord, there are still millions of people on Corulus who are already dead. Vader's voice was hollow. Protocol Terminus. Orbital bombardment. Burn everything. As the fleet prepared to withdraw, Star Destroyers rained fire upon Corulus's surface. Cities burned, forests vaporized, oceans boiled. Millions died in nuclear fire rather than being consumed by the Tyranids. It was mercy of a sort. The quick death of bombardment versus the horror of being dissolved alive in digestion pools. The Imperial fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a sterilized world and the incomplete Death Star, which the Tyranids would eventually consume and incorporate, learning the secrets of its construction for use in their own bioships. Darth Vader stood alone on the bridge as hyperspace streamed past, feeling the shadow in the Force grow larger still. They had bought time, weeks, perhaps months. But the Tyranids were patient. They would adapt to orbital bombardment, develop spores that could survive planet-killing strikes, breed organisms that could detect and neutralize superweapons before they fired. The galaxy was losing, not through superior tactics or firepower, but through simple evolutionary mathematics. The Tyranids would consume until nothing remained but themselves, and then they would move on to the next galaxy, leaving behind only silence. 6 months after the first Imperial scout ship went silent in the unknown regions, the galaxy burned. Coruscant had become a fortress world, its gleaming spires now surrounded by orbital defense platforms that fired ceaselessly at the bioships pressing against its shields. The planet's population had swollen to unsustainable numbers. Refugees from 1,000 consumed worlds packed into hab blocks that had never been designed for such density. Starvation, disease, and civil unrest killed thousands daily. The Empire's iron grip had become a desperate embrace, holding together a civilization on the brink of collapse. In the Imperial Palace's war room, an unlikely coalition gathered around the holographic display. Emperor Palpatine, diminished and aged by his failed attempt to dominate the Hive Mind. Darth Vader, standing vigil over strategic plans that grew more desperate by the hour. Mon Mothma and General Dodonna, representing what remained of the Rebel Alliance. Jabba the Hutt, his criminal empire reduced to a single ship. Even a Mandalorian delegation, their warrior culture finding grim purpose in fighting an enemy that couldn't be intimidated. "The deep core worlds are our last hope," Mon Mothma said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "If we can establish a defensive perimeter around the gravitational anomalies there, we might create a barrier the Tyranids can't easily cross." "A cage," Palpatine corrected bitterly. "You're proposing we trap ourselves in the deep core and hope the Tyranids lose interest. Hope they consume the rest of the galaxy and move on." "Do you have a better plan, Emperor?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Vader studied the tactical display, watching red markers spread like a plague across worlds that had once teemed with life. The Tyranids now controlled over half the known galaxy. Every engagement taught them more about Imperial and Rebel tactics. Every consumed world gave them resources to breed more specialized organisms. They had begun developing bioships with hyperdrive analogs, slower than proper hyperspace, but functional enough to dramatically increase their expansion rate. "There may be one option," Vader said quietly. All eyes turned to him. The researchers on Facility 227 Theta theorized about severe psychic disruption creating blind spots in the Hive Mind. We've never had enough Force-sensitive individuals to test it at scale. "Because the Jedi are extinct," Palpatine said coldly. "You're doing, Lord Vader." "Yes." Vader felt no shame, only grim recognition of irony. "But there are still Force sensitives scattered across the galaxy. Untrained, hiding, afraid. If we could gather them, dozens, perhaps hundreds, and coordinate a massive Force assault on the Hive Mind's synaptic network, you'd create a psychic weapon." Luke Skywalker spoke from the doorway, his presence unexpected. "Turn Force sensitives into living bombs to disrupt the Tyranids. It would give us an advantage, temporarily. And then they'd adapt, breed organisms immune to Force attacks, and we'd have sacrificed hundreds of potential Jedi for nothing. Luke stepped forward, his face harder than it had been 6 months ago. War aged everyone. I'll do it anyway. If it saves even one world, it's worth trying. Vader felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Pride, perhaps, or regret for what this war was forcing them to become. Desperate survivors willing to sacrifice anything for a few more days of existence. The plan is sound, Palpatine admitted grudgingly. Begin recruitment immediately. We'll need at least 3 months to train them in basic coordination. We may not have 3 months, Dodonna interjected, pointing to the display. The Tyranid advance on Corellia will complete within weeks. After that, the final push to Coruscant becomes inevitable. The meeting dissolved into technical discussions of fleet positioning, resource allocation, and evacuation priorities. Vader listened with half his attention, the rest focused on the shadow in the Force that now dominated his every waking moment. It was vast beyond comprehension, a hunger that had consumed galaxies before this one and would consume galaxies after. Later, as Coruscant's artificial night fell across the war room, Vader found himself alone with his son. "Do you think we can win?" Luke asked. "No." Vader's honesty surprised them both. "But we can survive. We can adapt, retreat, preserve what we can, and hope that someday someone will find a true weakness in their biology. Every day we survive is a victory." "That's not the answer I expected from you. 6 months ago, I believed in the Empire's absolute power, in the dark side's supremacy, in my master's invincibility." Vader gestured to the viewport, where fires burned in Coruscant's lower levels. Riots, accidents, desperation made manifest. "The Tyranids have taught me that power means nothing against an enemy that exists outside all frameworks of dominance and submission. They are the galaxy's reckoning. Perhaps we deserved this." Luke said nothing, but through the Force, muffled as it was by the Hive Mind's shadow, Vader sensed his son's disagreement. The young Jedi still believed in hope, in the possibility of redemption and victory. Perhaps that belief would be enough to sustain him through the dark times ahead. Or perhaps it would break him as the Emperor had been broken, as the entire galaxy was being broken against the implacable reality of the Tyranid hunger. Outside, the first bioships began their assault on Coruscant's outer defenses. The final battle was beginning. The galaxy, far, far away, had learned a terrible truth. In the vast darkness between stars, there were horrors older and hungrier than any Sith Lord could imagine. And once awakened, they could not be reasoned with, could not be defeated, could only be endured. If the survivors were very, very lucky.